Hey, welcome back, everybody. Actually, today is my first podcast interview hosted in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And my guest today is, as you heard, is Mark Kelnhofer. And Mark, first and foremost, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on this podcast with me.
Yeah, no problem. Glad to be here. I know you and I go back for quite a few years, but we finally got to make the connection.
Well, yeah, we had to reschedule this a couple of times due to my move and some other things, but we finally able to figure it out. And we go all the way back. I don't remember the year, but it was back at Ohio Dominican University.
Yeah, we both actually taught accounting there, and yeah, I can't even tell you how far back that was.
So it had to be, let's just pick a year. Let's say 2004. But it's something like that. I mean, we know each other for a lot of time. We live in the same, basically the same city, Westerville, Ohio. Our paths over the years kind of crossed periodically, and we kind of fell off the radar. But you'd asked me to speak at one of your conferences that you host. We're going to talk more about that because it really got me thinking. You used to work for Bravo Brio Restaurant Organization, and back in 2009, you left and you started this company called Return on Ingredients. So that entrepreneurial spirit lives in you completely, because we'll talk about the other things you do. But tell me about that thought process when you decided it's time to leave the Bravo restaurant and start your own business.
Yes, so let me tell you a little bit more about that. So my background, as you know, is it started in manufacturing accounting. I was a cost accountant in the industry for 10 years. And, as you know, it's a very analytical position. And I loved everything about what I was doing in the industry. And it was a wide variety of different types of things that I got exposed to in manufacturing. But then I got a call one day with the Bravo Brio Restaurant Group in 2002 to come join them. And what I found out quite quickly was that they really had no clue what their cost structure was. Not at all. I mean, they had a partial idea on ingredients, but not too very analytical, not what I was used to in manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And so when I got there, I really started thinking about applying managerial cost concepts to the restaurant industry. And so if you think about that, we talk all the time about raw materials and direct labor and overhead. Well, you know what? A restaurant technically is a manufacturer. Yep. The ingredients are the raw materials. They're modifying those ingredients. There's definite processes that happen. It's a very scientific calculation when you talk about densities, weights, measures, yields. And, direct labor is that chef or bartender that's producing the product for you. And they have overhead just like anybody else. So when we talk about menu engineering and the ability to plan for profitability, it becomes such a great tool because now we do know our total cost. And really one of the reasons why I got into an entrepreneurial role is that I looked at the industry as a whole, and I saw that the restaurant failure rate was huge. Mm-hmm. Right? So right there's a piece of something where I was like, there might be something to this, Mm-hmm. And at Bravo Brio Restaurant Group, when I actually applied those concepts, it was a definite paradigm shift, right? We looked at costs differently. We treated it differently. We were able to benchmark performance in every component of cost. And we made sure that we were driving profitability and cash to the bank, right? And as part of that, I was able to reduce their cost line 5 consecutive years in a row. And it is big dollars in savings. So I knew, not only did I know conceptually that everything could work, I actually had a case study now where I had big dollar results from that. And before I left Bravo, I went ahead and I interviewed other restaurant operators that are in town here. And there's a lot of restaurants, as you know, in Columbus. We're the test market for many, many different chains. And, I saw that there was the similar lack of controls, and in some cases, even lack of recipe documentation. So I knew that the need was great, right? I knew that the operators were out there, they weren't too methodical. And, in addition to that, what I found out from speaking at a lot of different hospitality management schools, culinary schools, is I really saw that on the academic side, there was a lack of instruction on cost controls or how to develop a cost, or even hospitality accounting courses, the basics of how to read a financial, or even more importantly, an entrepreneurship course. So I saw all these things come together, and I really felt that this was a niche. There's not too many people. I bet if you look and try to search, you probably would not find maybe anybody that does managerial cost accounting for a recipe, right? And that's really how Return on Ingredients started in 2009. It is from that. I did do some research, and I wanted to be methodical myself before I made that jump.
So as you're telling the story, I remember that I actually came out to one of the Brio Bravo restaurants, and you were showing me around, and you were showing me the cost control pieces that you were put in place, from measuring out weights, that whole aspect of it, and having spent enough years in the restaurant business, I went, this is really cool what you've done, and it really is, because you've helped. Just like I'm looking at your sign and behind you, controlling food and beverage costs to improve efficiency and profit.
Yeah, and the other thing around that is that you're now able to control every aspect of cost. And the reason why that's more important ever today than pre-COVID. I always was talking pre-COVID that this is an important thing to do. We need to do it. I wanted to shift. It's a paradigm shift for the industry to actually think about costs like this. But today, post-COVID, it's more important than ever, because they're getting hit on every aspect of cost. Commodity costs are changing at such a rapid rate that we have to respond to them. Labor costs are way up, including benefits. And then there's some overhead costs that are getting pressured on too. So, the electricity and natural gas and some of the supplies they're buying, they're all going up in cost. So I used to say before COVID that the restaurant industry is probably one of the most difficult businesses to be in. And today I say it's definitely the most difficult business to be in, because they have so many things they have to respond to.
And, labor is the big one. And that labor cost, but then finding people to work in this post-COVID. I mean, a lot of restaurants have had to either limit hours. I went to some restaurant. Oh, I wanted sushi one day, and I went to this restaurant, and that was part of the order, but it was later in the afternoon, and they said we're out of rolls. We can't find enough sushi chefs to basically staff us 24/7. But so on Tuesdays they come in and just make enough rolls and they leave, and when we sell out, we sell out.
Right. And the other thing you'll see sometimes, and I've seen this, is that have you ever walked into a restaurant where part of the restaurant's closed because they don't have enough waiters or waitresses?
Yeah. So
the labor, it's definitely a big issue. I don't want to say they're fighting, but they're definitely competing against each other for that quality labor pool. But there is a limitation on the skill sets that they can get. I have a restaurant here in town that told me, hey, we did our staffing, but I can tell you that the skill sets are not what we expected, and we're actually paying a premium for them.
Yeah, it's almost like, here, let me put this mirror underneath your nose. You can fog it up. You're hired.
Yeah. They, the real issue when I teach this, when I speak at trade shows or teach, one of the things I say, it's that this data that we're gathering is to help us respond. And today they have to respond quickly, right? Yeah. So if there's an increase in a commodity, a food commodity, they have to now respond quicker than ever, because if they don't, they take a hit on cost, and it's not acceptable anymore just to let that cost increase go, right? So
Right.
they have to have the mechanisms in place, but they also have to understand how to make those decisions, proper decisions on how to make sure the company continues to be profitable and successful. Because you can make a bad decision very easily. I mean, it's incredibly easy. So if you don't have the proper data in front of you, I've seen some restaurants make decisions off of, sometimes quantity only, right? We have this thing that we're taught in accounting class, cost, volume, profit, right?
Right.
And, I tell my students, is quantity always the most important thing? And it's really not. What's the most important is the profitability every one of those menu items drives.
Mhm.
So I've seen people that'll pull something off that might have a lower quantity in sales, but technically it had a higher profitability, and it just hurt themselves in the foot, right? Shot themselves.
Yeah.
And the bottom line all of a sudden is taking a hit because they didn't look at all the components.
Right. Right. So help me here. So 2009, you started Return on Ingredients, but then basically almost 4 years later, you started this Restaurant Institute. What was the thought process into that?
Well, first of all, it's kind of a funny story. So,
Cool.
and you'll enjoy this. So I was speaking at some trade shows.
Mhm.
Right. So one of the things I did to help promote what I was doing for Return on Ingredients was that I was going to different trade shows and speaking. I wanted to become the authority on cost management.
Mhm.
And so the first year I did it, maybe I did 3 shows, right? And over time, as I did it, I got really good at it.
Mhm.
And prior to COVID happening, I probably did close to 35 shows that year.
Okay.
But what happened was that I was at these trade shows, and some of the attendees were saying, "Yeah, you should write a book." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I don't know if I can do that." But I ended up writing a book, right? Self-published.
Okay.
And I literally did all the desktop layouts. I did the cover and design. I did everything, right? But I didn't want the book to have Kelnhofer and Publishing on the back, right? So I went out in 2012 and I couldn't believe it. Restaurant Institute was available. I went to GoDaddy and it was there. So I grabbed it, restaurantinstitute.com. And I created a website, but I put the logo on the back of the book, right?
Cool.
And when I went to these trade shows, you wouldn't believe the response. A lot of the attendees were flipping the book over and they would see the Restaurant Institute logo and they were like, "Well, he's nationally published." And I didn't want to tell them it was just me cranking out this book, right? But that's how it really got started, because I wanted a brand on the book, right? And it's a funny way to start a company, but it had a purpose, right? The whole idea was to sell the book and promote what I was doing on Return on Ingredients. So then after that, Restaurant Institute actually grew, right? So instead of just books, we have our own periodical now that comes out every quarter called Food, Beverage, and Labor Cost Control Quarterly. And it's a digital publication. It's been in place for 5 years. And we also created our own conferences. So what I did is I was speaking and traveling all over the nation and sometimes outside the nation.
Mhm.
And I said, I should just create a conference in Columbus, right? Have them come to me. Why am I doing all this traveling, right?
Yeah.
So I created this very specific cost control conference. And it's called the Food, Beverage, Labor Cost Management Summit. And I started it here in Columbus, believe it or not, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been in place that many years. And now we've grown that conference to Washington, D.C., Louisville, Kentucky. We're going to Charlotte, North Carolina next year. So the conference component, or the educational component, has been growing. And we're now getting into management and training modules on it. And that's a work in progress, but it's soon going to be announced that we are going to be able to provide online training specific for hospitality arena. And we're getting into the training piece. So it's a company that started really kind of oddly, but now it's got its own legs, and it really has grown into something quite different than when it first started.
Such a great story. It is such a great story, Mark. That is impressive. The idea to come up to have the publisher Restaurant Institute, and how that has taken off. And so, how did you pick? I know why you probably picked DC, because you're an adjunct lecturer at Georgetown University. So was that okay? Louisville and Charlotte. What was the ideas around those two? Other than you might like bourbon a lot.
When I create a new city or want to go into a new city, I always want a partner. Now,
Okay.
on LinkedIn, as you know, I got thousands of connections.
Yeah.
But I want a partner to help support what the event's about, help promote it. And so I don't go into a new city unless I have some sort of partnership with it. Okay. So when I look at Louisville, we have a partner there with the Kentucky Restaurant Association. They want the conference to be in Louisville, Kentucky, and they are willing to help promote that conference as well as us, right? And maybe even provide speakers, things like that. So in Charlotte, it's Johnson & Wales University, right? So we're working with them directly for the same purpose. They want to have the event on their campus. So when I have these partnerships, to start out a conference in a brand new city, the first year goes off a lot better than not having a partnership. And so we make sure we have those types of connections or relationships built before we ever launch something. And I think that component is so critical. You know, when I started the one in Columbus, I had a lot of contacts in Columbus, but I didn't really have a partner in Columbus, and it's so difficult to get people to come to meetings. And so you really got to have dynamic speakers. You got to promote it properly. You got to have the right content. And so having a partner to promote what that's all about just assists in being able to get into these different cities.
So the school in Charlotte, do they have is it a food and beverage school? Is it a university, but they have a food and beverage hospitality major?
Yeah. So Johnson & Wales, that's a well-known hospitality school. It's probably one of the top hospitality schools in the nation. So I obviously wanted to partner with them. So I've been talking with them, and they're very interested in launching this conference next year. But that's how, I got, you'll laugh at this too. I went to Half Price Books one day, and I picked up, believe it or not, a national directory of all the hospitality management schools in the nation.
Really?
It's out of print, right? So I will never loan this book out to anybody, but I have it, right?
Okay.
But I use that as a resource to know where all the programs are. And I know over time from speaking where all the prestigious programs are. And we try to build relationships with those universities and schools. But I now have all the national programs at my fingertips where I can reach out. If I want to go to any city for that matter, I can reach out and actually tap onto the program chair, the director of the program, and be able to create those relationships.
Well, I have to ask this question now. Does Oklahoma State, are they in your directory?
Is what?
Is Oklahoma State, do they, I'm going to look it up. Do they have a hospitality major or whatever? I'm just curious.
At my disposal, right?
Yeah.
But, it's sorted by state, and I took the time to put it into a spreadsheet.
Of course you did.
Of course I did, because I wanted to make sure that it was an electronic file.
Right.
I got the book here too, so we can look at the book. Now this book is out of print, so we'll see how current it is by looking it up. But that would be another OSU.
There would be another OSU. Yeah, there's 3 of them in the U.S., and you might as well try to get all 3 of them in your stable.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we'll see here. Let's see what we got. Oklahoma. Okay, so they do have, and on this directory, we have one that's actually in Oklahoma City, which is a technical school. It's not OSU.
Okay.
But then it says Oklahoma State. Is it Oklahoma? It must be a branch where they have a hospitality management program.
Okay.
It might not be on the main campus, but it looks like it's at a branch.
I will look that up for you. Maybe back then it was on the branch, maybe it's now on main campus. I will find that information out and send it to you.
So there you go.
So there you go. It's all about connections. So that's been going on, and that's how we got reconnected. You called me one day and said, "Hey, I got a speaker that bailed on me. Can you come and speak at this restaurant conference?" I said, "Absolutely, let's do it." And I did it. I enjoyed it. Clearly I was not speaking. I was doing more of the management training and leadership aspects of it. But I did meet it at one of the partners at Fido.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple conversations over the past since April. And we were just about ready to get together and have another side conversation, but I moved. But I told him when I come back, when I have time, we're gonna get together and talk. Nice guy. I'm interesting
Scott
story.
Neff.
Yeah, Scott Neff. He wrote I've got his book and I've read it. I forgot what it's titled now.
Right, he's a partner of Dodge, Bob. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
in contact with him quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you've done that, and I've mentioned that you're an adjunct lecturer at Georgetown University. You started that in 2018, but you are a lecturer at the OSU, not OSU, it's the OSU now because it's. And how did that happen? I mean,
well, that's a kind of a funny story too. So I ended up, I was at a trade show, I think out of state, and somebody from Ohio State was in the crowd, right? And I said, well, I live right down the road, and you didn't have to come all the way out here to come see me speak, And so, but they ended up inviting me to come speak as a guest speaker to the hospitality management program at Ohio State. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to do it. It's right down the road. So I came in and I spoke for an hour to the students there, as well as the faculty. All the faculty were there, and their board was there and all that. And I ended up getting the offer maybe 6 months later to come teach the cost control course there. And so it really came out of a speaking engagement. And so I'm a firm believer that this whole educational marketing aspect really works well, right? So, when I go to a trade show and I'm in front of a bunch of professionals, if they're in front of me at my session, they're almost like pre-qualified leads because they need some help on cost or menu engineering or profitability. And so, every time I would do a trade show, I'd walk out the door with a bunch of business cards, as leads, but it also led to things like Ohio State, where, if I didn't do all that speaking, I would never have that opportunity.
Absolutely. I want to, so when you, and you don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but the speaking engagements that you got at these trade shows, were they pro bono, or were you collecting at least travel expenses to cover, or were you actually had a fee to go along with it?
That's really a great question. And so the answer to the question, if anybody actually wants to do the same approach, is that it's incredibly negotiable, right? And I've been paid as much as $6,000 to do a session, but I've also been paid zero, where I said, I understand the circumstance. If it's let's say it's a local chapter of an association, a lot of times they don't have a lot of money. I'll do a pro bono, but I'll still get in front of enough people to make it worth my while where I can collect the leads and all that. So it's negotiable. And, on the pro bono side, you have to be careful about taking on maybe some speaking engagements that may not have a crowd size big enough, where you definitely want to make sure you want to get some good quality leads out of it, but you don't want to talk to a small group where you may not get any leads, right?
Right.
So you kind of have to evaluate the opportunity. And sometimes you have to create the opportunity. And what I mean by that, you're going to, again, this is maybe a lesson in life and things I've done, but I got really methodical at speaking at trade shows, meaning that a lot of trade shows have call for speakers and proposals. And sometimes, in some cases, it might be 6 to 9 months out when that process happens. So I created an Excel spreadsheet, surprise, surprise, on, I had a total 130 different trade shows that were related to food and beverage, where I knew exactly the dates of the event, when the call for proposals were coming due,
Mhm.
so that I could chip away at sending their proposal way in advance. So I had a head start on the competition, all the other speakers that you're going to be against. And so I ended up having that process in place so that I would have, it's not too unusual that I'd put in, 60 different proposals during the year and land half of those. So, but it took some work on my part to know when those deadlines were coming up, how to write the proposal, all of that. And so you can't just sit back and wait for them to come to you. You really have to be proactive to go after certain events if you want to speak at them.
For my audience, that is a great lesson he just shared, because I've been doing that and speaking at trade shows, speaking at associations, speaking to anybody that has the audience that you want to do business with. You have to be proactive, and you have to separate yourself from competition. And with you, Mark, you've got such a niche market, but that niche market is so important to the bottom line of your audience, of your customer, that, like you said, people just start handing you business cards. Now, out of that, you get, say you walk away with 50 cards, all you need is one.
Yes, but what I'll do is I'll really evaluate the 50 cards, and I'll be proactive at, the whatever it might be, the 5 or 6 that I really want to go after,
Right.
And yeah, you don't close all of them, but if you close that one, it's a big deal, and you mentioned the word customers. Let me just tell you about this too. So my customer, when I started, was obviously the restaurant industry. So I really target as much as possible emerging chains where they have a couple locations, they're growing, but they don't have the cost controls in place.
Mhm.
Now we've done chains too, because you might be surprised how many chains grow to be 40, 50, 60 stores and still not have the proper cost controls in place.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're not going to do a sole location, because we've done them,
Mhm.
but I'm selective about taking those on. But the whole point of where I'm getting on this is that the customer has changed. And what I mean by that is that, so if you sit back, and I want you to think about this is my thought process too. So I'll tell you what my thought process is, and you'll see where I'm going with this. So the restaurant industry is not the only industry that has food and beverage recipes, right? So we've done things like casinos, hotels, sports arenas. You can go on and on, right? Cruise ships. There's all kinds of applications where we can manage food and beverage. It's not a restaurant.
Mhm.
And so we started really getting into microbreweries, because in Ohio here, we have 304 microbreweries. Now we're doing recipe costing for beer production, right?
Yeah.
And the restaurants that they have, right? So now we're doing, microbrewery concepts where we have a little bit more complex, that they do have a manufacturing process of a canned or keg product versus the restaurant side too. So what we're finding is that brewmasters are no different than culinarians. They have a lot of passion, a lot of emotion. They love their product, love what they do, but they don't always have numbers attached to them. And so the application, you probably would drive yourself up the wall if you thought about all the different places where food and beverage are being produced. But again, we want to create a niche. How many managerial cost accountants are in craft brewing?
Right. None.
So the customer, is changing. We're going into different areas, but it's all the same focus.
Wow. Well, you mentioned about the breweries and stuff, and I used to make my own beer. when I started this business, I quit. You may just inspire me to go back and start doing that again. Because people, I mean, people have said, why don't you start brewing your, a friend of mine said, you get the greatest barbecue I've tasted and you make the best beer and you're a terrible CPA. Why aren't you doing this?
Well, one thing I learned, I did do a small microbrewery once, and I actually went through the process of making a batch of beer with them and all that. But very labor intensive.
Yeah.
And so when I got, and it is a passion for them, but when I got done with that batch of beer, I kind of said, I'm never going to make my beer again. I'm going to buy it because it's so incredibly labor intensive, right?
Yeah, labor and time. It takes about a month from start to finish.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many stories that I'm gonna have to have you back on because there's so many other stories that I know that you have that, from an entrepreneurial perspective, that I'd love to tap into and dig a little bit deeper. You brought up the phrase of the day, or the two words, my new two words moving forward that I've never heard this used before, is menu engineering.
Yeah, so you've never heard of that term before?
I've never heard of that term, but I understand the term, but I've never heard the term before.
So, think of it as another way to look at cost, volume, profit, right? It's a different way of doing it, but it's a little different in that when we engineer a menu, it's called menu engineering, but it's greater than that. It's actually category engineering. So if you look at a menu and you see an appetizer section, we're looking at those 6 appetizers and we're analyzing performance, and we are looking at profitability. We want to make sure that we have the highest profitability items on each category. So every category, when we do menu change, we're really making methodical decisions about what is coming off and what's going on. And so one of the things that we do, as an example, is that if something is making the smallest amount of profit, that's really one we're going to target to take off. Now, sometimes it's not always about the numbers, right? And we're in a field that has passion, emotion, creativity. And so you do have to go to these owners sometimes and say, look, we really think this is the item to take off. And they might say, this has happened before, a funny story, is that's my mother's recipe from decades, or from her grandmother, right, or her mother, and it goes back for generations. And they're like, there's no way I'm going to take that off. I go, well, this is a business, right? If you're in it for a hobby, you're in the wrong business, right? And so it is partially about the numbers, but sometimes there's that emotion that drives some of the decision that you have to address. Yeah. And so every category needs to be engineered. And the thing that we want to make sure of is that we increase our chances for profitability. And what I mean by that is when we develop a new product, let's just pretend that we took an item off and the profit on that item was $3, right, per plate. When we put a new item on, the one thing that we don't want to do is decrease our chances for profitability. So if we put an item on that has a greater per profit item per plate, it increases our chances. But if we put an item on that only makes $2 per plate in place of the one we just took off, what do you have to do? You have to sell more, right, to make up for that difference. And so it's incredibly methodical in terms of the numbers they use, but even the placement. So when you go to a restaurant, and I know a lot of restaurants don't do this, and if I had a menu in front of me, I could show you, but how we lay out the menu and where we put the menu items really matters. There's actually what's called an eye gaze study that scientifically states how a person reads a menu: first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? So where we place the menu items really has an impact on profitability. So the way I do it is that every category, I put the most profitable item up on top in descending order, right? And the waiter or waitress has that suggestive selling capability. Right. They don't need to know the numbers, but they are and they do have a high impact on profitability. So if they knew that the best selling product in each category was on top, going down in descending order, they're actually the people that are going to help drive the profitability of the company.
Right.
So it's a lot of different things, a lot of different points. And, you know, and we can talk all day about menu design and readability and all that. But where we put it on the menu and which items we put on or take off, those are critical decisions for the company that need to be made, and they got to be done methodically.
Man, that's fascinating. Now I will never look at a menu the same way.
Yeah,
Ever
I'll
again.
give you another piece of that. So when we talk about when I go into a new client, but this is not, I'll ask you this question because you've eaten out enough, right? Have you ever gone to a restaurant and had trouble making a decision on what to get because of the sheer quantity of menu items they have?
I won't mention the restaurants, but yes.
Right, right. So I tell my students, I want them to bring menus into my class, right? And I say, I want you to count the number of menu items. So a student will bring one in, and let's say they have 80 menu items, and I'll ask them, do you think that location can really produce consistently with the same quality those menu items? And the answer every time is no, I don't think they can. It's too complex. So the idea is that we shrink the menu. It's called menu rationalization. That's the technical term for it. But we shrink it because we want to have higher quality, consistency and efficiency, right? You know, one of the best menus I've seen in town, and there's quite a few of them here, 101 Beer Kitchen, if you've ever gone there and you look and you count that menu, maybe 25, maybe less items listed, right? Well, they have high consistency, high quality. It's very executable. You know, so when I see a menu that has 25, 30 items, that's really where we need to be. And the other thing this translates to is that if you ever read descriptions on a menu, I'm very good at telling when things are house made just from the descriptions on the menu.
Right.
And so when I see a lot of menu items on a menu, you know, I have a new client now that has like 80, and I read the descriptions and I can tell that out of those 80 menu items, they have a lot of prep to do to support it.
Yeah.
That sometimes relates to a lot of prep recipes, sometimes over 100. If you think about all the ingredients you need to support those prep recipes and the menu items, now you're well over 100 in purchased products that you have to get to support it. So all of a sudden, this really goes all the way back to inventory management too, because now instead of having these excessive inventories, if I reduce the size of the menu, I'm reducing the size of the inventories they have.
Right.
And by the way, the inventories are turning. They're making money for us. They're not products sitting on the shelf that one day may actually go bad, because we do have shelf lives. Food doesn't last forever.
Right.
And so that this whole idea of the recipe costing and menu engineering, it has such an impact on the overall business. It's what they're all about, but they don't have a good idea of what that cost structure is. Yeah, it's a tough business.
It is a tough business. So thank you for taking time. This has been fascinating. Like I said, I'll never look at a menu the same way. And actually, I'm going to bring some of this into my classroom now. Actually, I think I'm going to have my students listen to this episode, and just because a lot of them are business majors and they don't understand why, you know, those intro classes into the accounting world are so important.
Yeah. So, you know, when I did teach financial accounting back those years, or managerial accounting, you know, at Ohio Dominican with you way back, you know, I was actually using food and beverage examples because they can relate to it. Right. And, you know, managerial accounting, if you think about it, it's a difficult course. It's complex, but if you talk in terms of food, they understand it a lot more, or they accept it a lot more. But even better, if you brought the food in, then it's even better, right? Because then we can talk about, hey, look what happens when we process this product, and what happens to cost. You know, so I use, you know, sounds ridiculous, but if I bring a banana in front of you now, and I peel the banana, That's a process.
Mhm.
And what I have left is the peeled banana and the peel I throw out, right? Well, a couple things have happened. We just had a loss on processing the product because technically you paid for the peel. It's by
Right.
weight, right? So now what I have left over, there's a yield on it, but automatically the cost goes up, right? Because I do have some waste that I can account for.
Mm.
But oh, by the way, it took somebody's hands to process it. It just didn't happen on its own, did it?
Right.
You know, that's direct labor, and then we can apply overhead to it. So you can use a simple example of peeling a banana and apply all the concepts of managerial accounting.
Absolutely. And that's why you're so successful in the classroom as well. So we have to wrap up. I
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Oh, by the way, you said the name of your podcast is Change Your Mind.
Change your mindset.
You change your mindset. That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Right? When you talk about changing an industry, that's what I'm trying to do, and change, creating a paradigm shift to completely change how people think about costs.
And you're doing a hell of a job of doing that. And like I said, I'm going to bring these examples. I'll have my students listen to this episode because I think they'll get a lot out of it and have a better understanding of why it's important to understand these types of accounting issues.
Mhm.
And it's more about it goes to profitability, and that's what everybody in business is trying to do, is be profitable. Friend, be careful, be safe out there. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't stop. Keep driving forward. And if you ever get to Oklahoma,
Yeah.
you gotta look me up.
As I say, you can invite me out there. Maybe we can coordinate something.
Okay, absolutely.
Awesome.
All right, buddy. Thank you
Yeah.
very
Hey.
much.
Yeah. Take care.